Chapter 241, The Arrogant Demolition Team. Great uncle, you don't have to personally greet us. Who am I for you to do that? Carl hurried over and shook Xandros' hand. What nonsense. Your daughter, Willow, is now the CEO of Southlake Corporation. Everyone in the manor knows that. It's natural that I come to greet your family. Xandros smiled and replied. He could see the attitude of the Stewart family from Southlake City toward their ancestors. In the past 2 years, only Carl had come alone each year for the holiday. But Xandros didn't want to dwell on it. Great, uncle, this is Willow. Next to her is my son-in-law, Caspian. Carl hurriedly introduced. Xandros didn't attend Caspian and Willow's wedding due to his old age, which wasn't convenient for him. This young man is very spirited. What a grand presence. Xandros looked at Caspian and then smiled meaningfully. Upon hearing this, Caspian was momentarily stunned. Xandros seemed to sense his true strength. Great, uncle, you flatter me. I'm just nobody without a job. Caspian smiled and replied. Xandros merely smiled and didn't say much. Afterward, Caspian and the others entered the Stewart family manor. There were mountains and rivers nearby, which made this place suitable to live in. But the location was a bit remote, and the buildings here were all old houses. It was said that the Stewart family was a martial arts family 100 years ago before it gradually declined. As time passed by, it was uncertain how many martial arts families were left. At the heart of the manor stood a house with glazed tiles and redwood, which was quite different from the surrounding buildings. It was the best building in the Stewart family manor. That building was the hall. The hall was crowded with people, making it exceptionally lively. Every year at this time, it was the liveliest day in the Stewart family manor, as people of all ages would come to pay respect to their ancestors. When Caspian and Willow walked by, they saw a large stone statue in the courtyard of the hall. The statue seemed to depict a martial artist holding a long spear. Centuries ago, martial arts families gradually rose, but over time, they disappeared and became just history. A lot of individuals in Diatoran were claiming to be grandmasters of martial arts to deceive others. Xandros walked to the center of the courtyard, and immediately, everyone quieted down. He held an influence there as he was the highest-ranking elder in the manor. I solemnly declare that the ceremony has officially begun. Xandros smiled. The next moment, music sounded, and firecrackers crackled. Despite being over 100 years old, Xandros appeared lively with a booming voice. He looked nothing like an old man. Hubby, I never expected the ceremony to be so lively. This is my first time attending, Willow said, as she linked arms with Caspian. She had visited once when she was young, but it had been too long ago to remember. However, she thoroughly enjoyed this atmosphere. It was far better than the hustle and bustle of the big city. Such a life had the most vibrancy. Amidst the cheers and excitement, a rumbling noise interrupted. The crowd turned to see several bulldozers and excavators charging into the village, followed by a few luxury cars. Dozens of men armed with steel pipes jumped out of the car, each looking formidable. This sudden scene frightened the residents. One man with a scar on his face sternly shouted, "You troublemakers! I give you 5 days to move out, and the time's up. Not only do you refuse to leave, but you're also holding a festival here. Do you not take me, Zach Huey, seriously?" Upon hearing this, everyone was petrified and didn't dare to say much. "Dad, what's happening?" Willow looked at Carl, puzzled. "I just found out, too. The Stewart family manor has caught the eye of a real estate tycoon who plans to build a tourist resort here. They want to clear out all the residents, but our people have lived here for generations. The people refuse to leave, and the compensation offered by the developers isn't much. It's less than half of Diatoran's standard for compensation in such cases," Carl explained. Upon hearing this, Caspian's face darkened. He couldn't believe that such oppressive powers still existed in Diatoran. It wasn't just happening in a bustling metropolis like Easton. Even in small cities like this one, these oppressive powers exist. The Stewart family manor was indeed a good location. It was nestled among mountains and rivers. Turning it into a resort would undoubtedly make a lot of money. However, the people of the manor had lived here their entire lives. Asking them to leave was one thing, but not providing proper relocation compensation was just outrageous. "Move. Impossible. The Stewart family has been living here for generations, for over a century. No matter what conditions you offered, we wouldn't move. Xandros stood up as he was furious. Stop causing trouble here, you old bastard. Our big boss promised that if you were willing to leave, you'd be treated fairly. So don't push your luck. Zach cursed angrily. It's not about money. Even if you offer us a mountain of gold, we wouldn't leave, Xandros argued. Yes, we wouldn't leave the Stewart family manor. That's right. This is our home for generations. We wouldn't move. The people of the Stewart family manor had all stepped forward and shouted. They had grown accustomed to living here. To leave suddenly would be difficult for them. Moreover, the compensation from the developers wasn't much. Once they left the manor, they would have had to buy new homes, and that little amount of money wouldn't have been enough. They had been depending on the resources of the mountains and rivers to survive. They might starve to death if they moved to another city. What a bunch of uncivilized troublemakers. I had given you a chance, but it seemed you wouldn't listen. It's not up to you anymore to decide whether you move or not. Zach grew furious when he saw the residents arguing. As he finished speaking, several dozen thugs behind him had closed in. Seeing them ready to act, the residents had anxiously stepped back a few paces. They had no way to deal with thugs like Zach, especially since they all had carried weapons. Caspian's expression had grown increasingly grim as he witnessed the scene. He had seen this kind of bullying and oppression many times before. These real estate developers only cared about profits and would cause chaos to get what they wanted. Who dares to step forward? As long as I'm alive, I won't allow you scoundrels to run wild on our ancestors' land, Xandros shouted aggressively. You old bastard, I'll kill you today. Zach was beyond enraged when he saw that Xandros wouldn't budge. He hadn't been able to take over the manor for a long time because of Xandros. Xandros was well respected there. If he protested against them and stirred up public outrage, the demolition work would have been difficult. If it were not for him, those ignorant residents wouldn't have dared to resist. Damn it, I'll teach you a lesson today. Zach grabbed a steel pipe and rushed towards Xandros. Chapter 242, He's Too Strong. Hubby, you will help these poor residents and great uncle, right? Seeing the tension rising, Willow expressed her worry. Caspian lightly patted Willow and smiled, saying, Honey, don't worry. I definitely won't stand by and watch them getting bullied. As Caspian was about to take action, Carl stepped forward. Stop whatever you're doing. My daughter is the CEO of Southlake Corporation. If you know what's good for you, you'd better leave right now. Carl shouted at Zach with a grim expression. Zach looked fiercely at Willow and spoke. Southlake Corporation. Who do you think you're scaring here? How can the CEO of Southlake Corporation come from this impoverished area? So what if your daughter truly is the CEO? Southlake City is far from here, and she has no authority over us. He wasn't intimidated. He had heard of Southlake Corporation, but this wasn't Southlake City. What did it have to do with him? Carl grew irritated upon hearing this. These people didn't even respect Southlake Corporation. Now, Carl didn't know what to do. Do you even have any regard for the law? I'll call the Inspector General's office right now and have all of you arrested. Carl sternly threatened. The Inspector General's office? Ha ha ha. You think we're scared of them? Go ahead, make the call. I'll tell you, they won't come to your aid no matter what you do. Zach laughed loudly. Carl couldn't believe these jerks were acting so high and mighty. Suddenly, Zach lost patience and yelled, Get out of my way. None of you will escape today. I'll teach you a lesson first. As he finished speaking, he swung the steel pipe in his hand toward Carl's face. Carl was taken aback as he didn't expect Zach to attack. Dad, Willow exclaimed. Just as the steel pipe in Zach's hand was about to hit Carl, a shadow darted forward and stood before him. In the next moment, Zach found himself unable to move his wrist, and the steel pipe remained suspended in midair. He was taken aback and looked up to see a burly man standing before him, gripping his wrist. Who do you think you are? Caspian glared at Zach with a grim expression. Without hesitation, he snapped Zach's wrist. A painful scream echoed from Zach as the steel pipe slipped from his hand. Caspian! Carl yelled in surprise. He hadn't expected Caspian to attack. Dad, step back. Let me handle this. Caspian instructed Carl. Carl didn't object and took a few steps back. Despite the Stewart family being biased against Caspian, Carl had always held a positive view of him. Force was needed to deal with scoundrels like Zach. My hand. Damn it. How dare you lay hands on me? Get him. I want him dead. Zach wailed in agony and glared at Caspian. At his command, dozens of people surrounded Caspian. This sight shocked everyone. The residents wanted to help but felt powerless and worried about Caspian's safety. Young man, hurry. You can still leave now. Yes. You can't take them all on alone. Run. These people are ruthless. You've done enough for us. Don't risk your life for us. The residents were aware of Zach's viciousness. If Caspian didn't leave, he might indeed be killed. However, Caspian wasn't afraid of these thugs at all. If he was honest, he wasn't bothered to deal with these hooligans. He would have let Sylvia handle them if she had been present. With a whoosh, Caspian swiftly charged forward. Seeing him advance further, the residents grew even more anxious. Meanwhile, Xandros stared intently at Caspian. What followed stunned everyone. In just a minute, Caspian took down dozens of thugs and left them wailing in pain on the ground. How is this possible? Everyone was shocked. How could Caspian be so formidable? He wasn't injured at all in the face of so many opponents. Willow found nothing peculiar about it as she was accustomed to such scenes. Carl, on the other hand, was particularly astonished. Bastard. Zach was furious as he saw his men all defeated. Now it's your turn. Caspian glared fiercely at Zach. Zach shivered and couldn't even meet Caspian's gaze after seeing the murderous intent in Caspian's eyes. As Caspian approached, Zach felt an unprecedented fear. What are you doing? Don't come near me, Zach shouted. He was scared. Without his subordinates, he had lost all confidence. He knew he couldn't beat Caspian. Now you're scared. Where was the fear when you were hurting people? Caspian was calm as he watched Zach. Trash like Zach wasn't worth the pity. Don't push me. I'm not someone you want to mess with, Zach yelled and ran toward a bulldozer. He pulled out the driver and took a seat. Rumbling sounds echoed as the bulldozer started up. I didn't want to kill anyone, but you forced me. Don't blame me for being ruthless. Zach glared at Caspian fiercely. As Zach spoke, he drove the bulldozer and charged toward Caspian. Caspian! Carl and Willow anxiously shouted at the sight. Willow knew Caspian had some skills, but he was still human flesh and blood. Carl anxiously watched Caspian as he was unable to help. The residents couldn't bear to watch further. They feared the scene would turn gruesome. At this point, Zach had lost his sanity and turned mad. He intended to drive the bulldozer and crush Caspian. You fool! You think you can fight well. Watch as I crush you. Zach laughed recklessly. The next moment, Zach's laughter suddenly froze. Caspian disappeared from where he stood. A loud noise echoed. Caspian had jumped onto the huge tire of the bulldozer. He shattered the window of the bulldozer's control room with his fist. With a tug of his hand, he effortlessly pulled Zach out of the driver's seat. Let go of me. Zach couldn't help feeling nervous as he was hanging in midair. Caspian's incredible speed left him stunned. He hadn't seen what happened before being hoisted by Caspian. Who was this guy? How could he possess such incredible physical prowess? Chapter 243, Higher Up. Zach struggled desperately, but he couldn't break free from Caspian's grip. Caspian's large hand was like a powerful clamp, firmly holding onto Zach, making it hard for him to even catch his breath. You, let go of me. Zach gasped as he looked at Caspian. Caspian ignored him, shook his hand, and flung Zach away fiercely. Ah, it hurts so much. Zach grimaced, his face contorted in extreme pain. When he hit the ground, every part of his body felt unbearable agony. Tell me, who ordered you to drive the people of the Stewart family manor away? Caspian stepped forward, planted his foot squarely on Zach's chest, and coldly demanded, I have strong backers. You better let me go now. If you dare mess around, I'll call the Inspector General's office and have them deal with you. You'd better not regret it by then. Zach gritted his teeth and threatened. Hearing this, Caspian couldn't help but laugh outright. A thug like Zach was talking about law and order, and even threatened to call the cops. It was rather amusing. Such troublemakers deserved a good beating. Caspian raised his foot and stomped heavily on Zach's chest. Zach's face turned red, and his breathing became even more labored. He felt like he might die at any moment. "Stop. I can't breathe." Zach's voice was hoarse as he pleaded. "Tell me, who's behind all this?" Caspian's face was stern as he stared down at Zach. Seeing the sharp look in Caspian's eyes, Zach trembled all over. He sensed a murderous intent within Caspian's eyes. He feared he might actually die at Caspian's hands. At this thought, he didn't dare to hold back anymore. Survival was his top priority. "I'll talk. It's Mr. Zot. It's all his idea. I was forced into this," Zach hurriedly confessed. "Mr. Zot? Which Mr. Zot?" Caspian furrowed his brows and asked. "Frank Zot. He's the nephew of Lincoln Zot, a tycoon in the Two Lakes area. Fidlick is notorious around here. It was him who insisted that I drive away the people of the Stewart family manor, because he wants to build a tourist resort in this area," Zach explained. Upon hearing this, Willow's expression tightened. She knew who Lincoln was. "Hubby, Lincoln is a real estate tycoon in the Two Lakes area." "Let's just drop this matter," she whispered. "He's just a property developer. I won't let him off easily for harming the people," Caspian said coldly. "Anyone who exploited the people would be at odds with him, the Diateranian god of war." "Where is this Frank now?" Caspian lightly patted Willow to comfort her and then turned to ask Zach. Upon hearing this, Zach's expression stiffened, somewhat shocked. He had made it clear that Frank was Lincoln's nephew. Shouldn't Caspian stop there? Would he dare to challenge Lincoln's business? Lincoln was influential in the business industries in the Two Lakes area. "Frank is at the Zot Corporation in the county town." Zach didn't hide anything and quickly spilled the information. "Get up. Take me to him now." Caspian waved his hand and forcefully lifted Zach from the ground. "What? Are you really going to confront Mr. Zot?" Zach was somewhat speechless. "Stop talking nonsense. If I can't find him, I'll deal with you," Caspian said coldly. Zach wanted to say more, but seeing Caspian's fierce expression, he didn't dare to continue. It seemed Frank was in big trouble this time, encountering someone so formidable. "Caspian, are you really going to settle things with Frank? Lincoln has quite an influence in the Two Lakes area," Willow expressed her concern. "Caspian, why don't we just drop it?" Carl also tried to persuade him. "Yeah, young man, we haven't lost much. Let's end this here. Frank is too influential here. It's better not to provoke him. Caspian, if our matter causes trouble for you, we'd feel guilty." Seeing this, the villagers of the Stewart family manor all spoke up. They were kind villagers who didn't want Caspian to get involved with the big shot because of their issue. They believed that the confrontation between Caspian and Frank might not end well. This was originally the Stewart family's matter. Caspian was just an outsider. He didn't need to stand up for them. "If I hadn't known about this, I could have let it go. But it just so happened that I came across it today. I'm determined to resolve this. Rest assured, I will ensure that you all can live here peacefully," Caspian earnestly said as he looked at everyone. The villagers of the Stewart family manor were incredibly grateful. Frank had used various means to drive them away. Zach not only repeatedly harassed them, but also frequently cut off their power and water supply to force them out of the manor. If it weren't for Caspian today, Zach might have truly destroyed the manor. "Young man, thank you so much," Xandros said to Caspian, touched. "Great uncle, there's no need for formalities. I'm Willow's husband and consider myself half a member of the Stewart family. It's my responsibility to take care of this matter," Caspian said with a smile. His words touched Xandros even more deeply. The Stewart family hadn't even shown up for the holiday, but Caspian did and also helped them. It showed Caspian's sense of justice. Without delay, Caspian had Zach drive him to find Frank. Willow was worried that something might happen to Caspian, so she followed them in her car. County Town wasn't very far from the Stewart family manor, just a dozen miles or so. Frank wielded great power throughout the entire town. He thrived there by milking on Lincoln's reputation. There was nothing that he couldn't develop. Frank managed to develop real estate everywhere with his tactics. Within a few years, he had become the wealthiest person in County Town. He even specifically trained a group of thugs to handle his troubles, and the locals dared not to resist. Those who offended him either ended up severely beaten or mysteriously disappeared. Everyone knew those who disappeared probably lost their lives. Meanwhile, In the Zot Corporation's president's office, there were sounds of panting. Any employee passing by the door quickly lowered their head and hurriedly left the area. Along with a cry, the office regained its peace. Frank, in his 30s, was plump and well dressed. He stood up, adjusted his pants, and leaned on the sofa with a satisfied smile on his face. His secretary hurriedly got dressed, too. The two often engaged in such activities in the office. Everyone knew about Frank's lecherous behavior, but no one dared to speak about it. Chapter 244, I will handle this matter. However, Frank's bedroom skills weren't impressive. He usually finished fast and wouldn't last long after starting. The secretary felt somewhat displeased inside but dared not to express it openly. She had to pretend to be satisfied and cooperate with Frank. After all, she relied on him for her livelihood. If she offended him, she would surely lose her luxurious life. Darling, you're amazing. I can hardly bear it. The secretary sat in Frank's embrace. Of course. Next time, I'll make you cry. Frank proudly laughed. The secretary turned her head away and rolled her eyes but quickly forced a smile. Darling, you seem to be in a good mood. Is there progress on the new project? During this time, Frank had been busy planning the resort. Once the people from the Stewart family manor were driven away, the project could commence. When the resort was completed, it would undoubtedly bring in significant profits. I've instructed Zach to bring bulldozers and excavators to the Stewart family manor. Dealing with these troublemakers requires a firm hand, Frank said smugly. Hearing this, the secretary pretended to be surprised. In reality, she had seen these kinds of things many times and was used to it. Frank had always been domineering and used his power to bully others as he engaged in countless misdeeds. He had blood on his hands, but those issues were always swept under the rug. Relying on these ruthless methods, he extorted the citizens and rapidly became a wealthy businessman in county town. However, the Stewart family manor was an exception. The residents there were adamant about staying. This matter had delayed the project for several months. Frank's patience had reached its limit. These troublemakers really don't know their place. I gave them so many options, yet they refused all of them. Right now, even if lives are lost, it won't matter. I have money, and there's nothing money can't solve, Frank angrily exclaimed. Just the thought of making a fortune once the resort was up and running made him happy. Suddenly, a loud noise reverberated as someone kicked open the door to the office. Frank shuddered in fear, and his secretary fell to the ground. Damn it. Which blind fool dares to come into my office? Are you tired of living? Frank cursed angrily. Just as he finished speaking, he saw a person falling heavily onto the floor. Zach, what's going on? Weren't you at the Stewart family manor? Frank was perplexed when he saw the disheveled Zach on the ground. Mr. Zot, Zach looked at Frank helplessly. Before he could finish, Caspian walked in. Are you Frank Zot? Caspian stared coldly at the man on the sofa. Exactly, that's me. Who are you? Frank felt uneasy about Caspian's demeanor. Caspian didn't answer directly. He sat in the office chair, crossed his legs on the desk, lit a cigarette, and took a drag. Afterward, he calmly stated, I'm your ancestor. Who the hell do you think you are? Frank erupted. Nobody had ever spoken to him in such a manner. Unable to contain his anger, Frank glanced at Zach on the ground and cursed. Useless. I asked you to drive the people from the Stewart family manor away. What's the point of bringing a stranger here? And he even dares to insult me. Frank directed all his rage at Zach. Zach was extremely helpless. He didn't want any of this. If he didn't comply with Caspian's wishes, he would have been in deep trouble already. I don't have time for your nonsense. I'm taking charge of the Stewart family manor's matter. Caspian stood up and walked over to Frank. A crisp sound echoed as he slapped Frank bastard. How dare you lay a hand on me? Frank held his burning cheek and looked at Caspian in shock. Caspian had acted before he had a chance to react. Frank had never seen anyone so bold before. Zach was secretly rejoicing when he witnessed this. It was the first time he had seen Frank being humiliated. Caspian had slapped Frank without warning. Seeing this, the secretary trembled in fear, screamed, and hid away. She hadn't expected Caspian to act so ruthlessly upon entering. Didn't he know about Frank's background? You punk. How dare you provoke me? I'll break your leg. Men, beat him up. I'll definitely demolish the Stewart family manor. Nothing can stop me, Frank shouted angrily. Taking down the manor was a done deal, and nobody could interfere. But suddenly, a brute showed up and even dared to lay hands on him. Was he tired of living? Do you think I'm here to negotiate with you? I'm here to inform you that anyone who attempts to drive out the residents of the Stewart family manor should stop immediately. I don't like to waste time. I want you to stop harassing the residents and shut down Zot Corporation. Then, turn yourself in. You know what you've done, Caspian said coldly. Hearing this, Frank was stunned. He couldn't believe what Caspian was saying. Shut down his company and surrender. Was Caspian joking? Over the years, he had committed countless crimes, though all were buried under the rug. But even so, they wouldn't withstand scrutiny. Unless he was crazy, he wouldn't turn himself in. You're daydreaming. I won't do any of that, Frank snapped. As Frank finished speaking, Caspian raised his hand and delivered one slap after another. Frank coughed up blood with a few teeth. At this moment, his cheeks had swelled. He was utterly dumbfounded. He had never seen someone so bold. Who was this person? Damn it. Where are the security guards? Frank yelled in frustration. Nobody responded to his cries for help. He had hundreds of subordinates patrolling the company, yet none appeared when called upon. Stop yelling. Your useless subordinates are all lying on the ground, sleeping. No matter how much you shout, no one will help you. Caspian smirked. How's that possible? Frank stared at Caspian in shock. All his men were taken down by Caspian. It was hard to believe that over 100 people couldn't stop one man. Frank was angry as he stared at Zach, who lay motionless on the ground. He was upset that Zach didn't tell him beforehand that a powerful figure was coming. Zach lay quietly on the floor and acted like he knew nothing. He was struggling to protect himself and dared not interfere in the situation. Chapter 245, Lincoln's Shock. Bastard, you've got the guts to provoke me. Do you know who my uncle is? He's the real estate tycoon of the Two Lakes area, Lincoln Zot. Mess with me, and you won't leave here in one piece. Frank glared at Caspian and shouted angrily. Before Frank could finish his sentence, Caspian kicked him out. Frank was sent flying, crashed into the wall, and collapsed onto the floor. His head felt dizzy from hitting the wall. He felt as if he was falling apart. I don't care about your uncle. Even if your grandpa came, it wouldn't matter. Lincoln is nothing in my eyes, Caspian said fiercely. Frank struggled to stand up as he knelt on the ground and stared at Caspian in shock. Who exactly was he? Not only was Caspian not afraid of Frank, but he also disregarded Lincoln. Frank dared to act so recklessly because of Lincoln. But today, he encountered someone unyielding. When the female secretary witnessed Frank's brutal beating, she fainted in fear. Zach remained motionless on the ground. Caspian, Willow was equally shocked when she entered and witnessed the scene in the office. Things appeared more serious than she'd imagined. Willow, don't worry, I'll handle this. Caspian smiled at her. Hearing this, Willow nodded. She knew Caspian was a general officer and felt reassured. Unbeknownst to her, Caspian's identity was more formidable than she'd imagined. As the Diaturanian god of war, it was only natural for Caspian to punish these scoundrels. Who are you? Frank glared at Caspian with resentment. You're not worthy of knowing my identity. You rely on Lincoln, right? Well, I also want to ask him if he wants to continue doing business in the Two Lakes area, Caspian retorted. Hubby, I have Lincoln's number. He worked with South Lake Corporation before. Willow took out her phone and handed it to Caspian. He nodded and dialed the number without hesitation. Once connected, he switched to speaker. Ms. Stewart, why are you calling me at this time? Is there something I can help you with? Came the respectful voice of Lincoln from the other end. Miss Stewart. Upon hearing this, Frank was stunned. Why was his uncle being so respectful? Glancing at Caspian and Willow, Frank grew more anxious. Had he offended a big shot? I am Caspian Lynch, Willow's husband. Do you know a guy named Frank Zot? Caspian spoke calmly. Lincoln hesitated for a moment before responding, Oh, Mr. Lynch. Yes, I do know him. I am Frank's uncle. Has that kid offended you? Lincoln didn't dare to offend Caspian now since Caspian was the husband of the CEO of South Lake Corporation. Southlake Corporation had become the largest company in the Two Lakes area. Since Caspian made the call from Willow's phone, that meant she was with him. Lincoln was very worried that Frank had caused trouble for him. He could take care of small matters, but there were powerful figures even he wouldn't dare to provoke. He not only offended us but acted extremely arrogant. Your nephew had his men bring bulldozers and excavators, aiming to tear down the Stewart family manor. From what I heard, he's been reckless for years. Perhaps you also played a role in this. Caspian spoke coldly. Upon hearing this, Lincoln was completely dumbfounded. He hadn't expected Frank to offend Caspian and Willow. Lincoln knew Frank's true nature very well. If it weren't for the fact that he was his nephew, he wouldn't even bother with such a worthless person. But he hadn't expected that Frank would dare to provoke Willow and Caspian. Frank was sealing his own fate. Mr. Lynch, Stewart. Lincoln felt extremely uneasy. You have 20 minutes. Get here, or face the consequences. Caspian interrupted Lincoln and hung up the phone. Frank's eyes were filled with despair as he knelt on the ground. He gazed fearfully at Caspian and Willow. He realized he had provoked powerful figures this time, and there might be no escape from this disaster. Frank remained quiet, his eyes vacant. He didn't struggle or say another word. He understood that whatever he did now would be futile. He was worried whether Lincoln could arrive in 20 minutes. It would take at least a 2-hour drive to get here from the Two Lakes area. Caspian didn't bother to talk to Frank, who seemed lost in his thoughts. Scum like him was unworthy of sympathy. After about 10 minutes or so, commotion echoed outside Zot Corporation. People looked out the windows and saw a helicopter descending onto the open ground outside the company. As the helicopter landed, a figure rushed out in haste. 2 minutes later, someone rushed into the office. Hello, Miss Stewart, Mr. Lynch. Lincoln gasped for breath. To arrive quickly, Lincoln had used his private helicopter. Seeing how miserable Frank was, Lincoln remained composed. However, he was panicking inside. His biggest concern now was how Willow and Caspian would handle this matter. Even though he was an affluent figure in the Two Lakes area, everyone understood that the Southlake Corporation was the largest enterprise there. Such a major corporation could easily topple another corporation with just a few moves. Besides, Lincoln had heard about Caspian and Willow's wedding, where even General John Anderson made an appearance. Hence, he speculated that Caspian definitely had some special identity. He couldn't afford to mess with such a person. However, Caspian and Willow remained silent. The more they kept quiet, the more scared Lincoln became. Damn it, you bastard. Look at the mess you've caused. Lincoln approached Frank and gave him a beating. I've told you countless times not to engage in illegal activities, but you never listen. From today, you have nothing to do with the Zott family anymore. Lincoln erupted in anger. Frank dared not resist, allowing Lincoln to berate and strike him. Hearing Lincoln's words filled him with despair. He knew what fate awaited him without Lincoln's support. All right, that's enough. Caspian intervened. Hearing this, Lincoln stopped. Frank was in a terrible state. His face was all beat up. He lay still on the ground with a trace of blood at the corner of his mouth. Lincoln didn't hold back as he was scared he would be in trouble as well. Mr. Lynch, Miss Stewart, this is all my fault. I let this jerk run rampant. I won't interfere with any punishment you decide for him. Lincoln's eyes glistened with tears. Frank bullies others and commits endless wrongdoings. I won't personally take any action against him, but someone else will punish him. Take him away, Caspian said calmly. Chapter 246, a groundbreaking move. Dealing with Frank was a trivial matter that Caspian didn't bother to intervene. Given Frank's wrongdoing, the Inspector General's office would certainly punish him. Get up. Take this worthless trash to the Inspector General's office. Lincoln kicked Zach's ass. Okay. Zach, who was pretending to be dead on the ground, stood up immediately. I hope you confess your crimes clearly. Any omission will bring you consequences. If you voluntarily confess, there might be a lighter punishment, Caspian added as Zach was about to leave with Frank. Upon hearing this, both Frank and Zach felt a chill down their spines. If they truly confessed everything to the Inspector General's office, they might face execution. Afterward, Zach left with Frank. Meanwhile, Lincoln stood motionless in place. His arms were trembling slightly, and his back was soaked with cold sweat. Caspian sat on the sofa and didn't say anything further. After a few minutes, he slowly spoke up. Lincoln, you supported your nephew's wrongdoings. Hence, you're partly responsible for any mistakes he's made. Now, I'm offering you a chance to make amends. Yes. Thank you for forgiving me, Mr. Lynch and Ms. Stewart. Lincoln sighed with relief. Dissolve Zot Corporation immediately. Compensate those harmed by Frank's actions with the remaining assets. Additionally, allocate a portion to refurbish the Stewart family manor without displacing the residents. I hope to see the manor thriving soon, Caspian stated calmly. Yes, I'll do it. Lincoln nodded. Also, allocate half of your assets to invest in South Lake Corporation, Caspian instructed as he observed Lincoln's nervous demeanor. Hearing this, Lincoln felt despair. Thankfully, he only had to invest in South Lake Corporation. The investment could even yield some returns. Lincoln dared not oppose Caspian's proposition, fearing the influence behind him. How could Caspian be an ordinary person if he managed to get General John Anderson to attend his wedding? Yes, Mr. Lynch. Lincoln gritted his teeth. He would do anything as long as he could continue his ventures in the Two Lakes area. This was also an opportunity for him to get closer to South Lake Corporation. Hubby, isn't this inappropriate? Willow said awkwardly. After all, this matter had little to do with Lincoln, as it was his nephew who had done wrong. Asking him to invest half of his assets into South Lake Corporation was the same as taking away half of his life. Hearing this, Lincoln shook his head. Willow's old habit of letting sympathy overwhelm her had resurfaced. Without Lincoln's support, how would Frank dare to act so arrogantly? If it weren't for Lincoln's influence, Frank wouldn't have been able to amass so many resources and become the wealthiest person in county town. While one might think Lincoln was wronged, that wasn't the case. Moreover, Caspian wasn't stripping away his assets, but merely offering him an opportunity by suggesting he invest in South Lake Corporation. Ms. Stewart, I accept all of Mr. Lynch's decisions. It's my honor to invest in South Lake Corporation, Lincoln said and forced a smile. Willow was momentarily speechless and somewhat bewildered. Lincoln was actually smiling and thanking Caspian. This was utterly insane. Mr. Lynch, I'll immediately arrange for the finance department to invest the assets in South Lake Corporation, Lincoln said as he stood up. Just as he was about to leave the office, Caspian stopped him. Hold on. South Lake Corporation is expanding its influence and needs new partners. Since you've also invested, you can consider working under my wife. Great. I'm more than willing. Upon hearing this, Lincoln didn't hesitate and nodded eagerly. He was eager to work with South Lake Corporation. In the Two Lakes area, countless people were desperate to work with South Lake Corporation, but had no chance. Now that Caspian had given him the chance, he wouldn't refuse it. This was completely unexpected for Lincoln. He never thought he would benefit from his misfortune. Thank you, Mr. Lynch. Thank you, Ms. Stewart, Lincoln exclaimed excitedly. Caspian's reason for doing so was to assist Willow. As South Lake Corporation continued to grow, it would encounter more and more troubles. Willow and Miranda definitely couldn't manage the entire South Lake Corporation. Lincoln was very business-minded and adept at managing finances. Hence, having him work for South Lake Corporation and provide advice would be beneficial. Caspian didn't want to constantly intervene in South Lake Corporation's matter. After all, he wasn't interested in managing a company. Willow was amazed at how thoroughly Caspian arranged things. She even suspected he had been a big boss before, as he was so clever. Soon after, shocking news spread. Frank Zot, who had committed numerous wrongdoings, had voluntarily surrendered himself. Furthermore, Zot Corporation announced overnight that all their assets would be given to compensate those who had suffered because of Frank's action. Even the Stewart family manor received the compensation. They would have someone to repair the roads and houses. This news made everyone in County Town joyful. Those who had been oppressed by Frank cheered and celebrated his arrest. People from the Stewart family manor also began celebrating. Not only did they not have to move, but their living condition would also improve. Simultaneously, in the Two Lakes area, a piece of shocking news surfaced. Lincoln Zot, the real estate tycoon in the Two Lakes area, suddenly announced the investment of half of his company assets into South Lake Corporation. The remaining half would be invested directly under Southlake Corporation's name. The news astonished everyone in the business circle. No one knew why such a change had occurred. Lincoln's assets, which amounted to at least billions of dollars, were just given to Southlake Corporation like that. While everyone was astonished, they were also envious of him as he had the opportunity to cooperate with Southlake Corporation. Numerous people in the Two Lakes area wished to collaborate with Southlake Corporation. Lincoln paid no heed to the news as he knew what he was doing. He was confident his decision was right. Even if it meant giving all his industry to Willow, he would do it. He believed she could build Southlake Corporation to such a level because there was a powerful figure supporting her. That person was likely Caspian. Chapter 247, Hidden Martial Arts Expert. Chapter 241. After Lincoln announced his investment in Southlake Corporation, he disappeared from everyone's sight. The most shocking thing was Southlake Corporation. During this period, Southlake Corporation cooperated with many companies and enterprises, becoming the largest enterprise in the Two Lakes area without anyone to rival it. Once Caspian resolved the troubles, he and Willow returned to the Stewart family manor. The residents eagerly awaited their arrival. Caspian, thank you so much. If it weren't for you, we might have all become homeless. Xandros expressed with joy. The news of Frank's surrender and the dissolution of his company spread rapidly. When the residents of the Stewart family manor heard about this, they found it hard to believe. After all, Frank was influential in the area, and ordinary people didn't dare to provoke him. It wasn't until the Inspector General's office announced the news that they were sure he was arrested. Seeing Caspian and Willow's return, they were enthusiastic. Great uncle, we're all family. There's no need for formalities, Caspian said with a smile. He then turned to everyone and solemnly stated, everyone, Frank has been apprehended. From now on, you can live here without any worries. Nobody will force you to leave. That's fantastic. We won't have to live in fear anymore. Thank you so much. Without you, we'd be homeless by now. The residents were incredibly excited, and their eyes brimmed with tears. For the past few months, they had lived in constant fear. Caspian's appearance had completely resolved their troubles. For them, Caspian was their savior. The residents no longer had to fear being evicted. And here's more good news. Frank's company has been shut down. The funds he extorted from the common folks have been invested in the manor. There will be people coming to build roads and bridges, renovate houses, and will establish a new school here. This will ensure that the children here receive an education, and the residents here will enjoy better living conditions, Caspian announced. The residents were momentarily stunned. It took them a while to digest this incredible news. You're a saint. I've never seen someone so kind. We will forever be grateful to you. The residents were emotionally overwhelmed as tears pooled in their eyes, and they all knelt before Caspian. No need to be so polite. I'm also part of the Stewart family. Please, get up. We can't bear this. When Caspian and Willow witnessed this scene, they immediately went to help them up. However, they wouldn't budge as they remained kneeling on the ground. In the eyes of the residents of the Stewart family manor, Caspian was a saint and a savior. The manor had long-standing unresolved issues, which were difficulties in children's education, dilapidated houses, and rough roads. Caspian's arrival had completely transformed their lives. Let's go. In gratitude, the residents have prepared a feast in the hall. They want to treat you well to express their gratitude. Xandros excitedly pulled Caspian. Caspian naturally didn't refuse and went with Willow to the hall. As night fell, the hall glowed with lights, and the residents were incredibly warm-hearted. Each household brought out chickens, ducks, fish, and even cows and sheep that they had kept for a long time, all to serve Caspian and Willow. Many people raised their cups to toast Caspian. Willow, who didn't usually drink, also happily took a few sips. She had never experienced such simple and genuine hospitality. Caspian further discussed the time and location for establishing the school. There were no schools established in the manor, and the children had to travel more than 6 miles to study. Caspian's actions gave hope to these children. The residents were immensely grateful to him. After 3 rounds of drinks, Caspian was a bit drunk and felt dizzy. Meanwhile, Willow had fallen asleep on the table as she was overwhelmed by the alcohol. When Caspian saw Willow peacefully asleep, he smiled and draped his coat over her. Caspian, let me raise a toast to you. Xandros smiled when he saw this. He stood up with a cup of wine and approached Caspian. Great uncle, I should toast you. Caspian also rose and raised his cup. They both finished their drinks. As Xandros finished, he suddenly became serious. Caspian, come with me. Seeing Xandros' sudden change in demeanor, Caspian became curious. Without much thought, he followed him. Both arrived outside the hall. Xandros stood firm as he exuded a vigor that was rarely seen in a 100-year-old man. Great uncle, what's the matter? Caspian asked, puzzled. Tell me the truth. What is your true background? Xandros stared at Caspian and scrutinized him. Looking at Xandros' sharp gaze, Caspian was stunned for a moment. It seemed this old man knew something. Great uncle, what background could I possibly have? I'm just Willow's husband. Are you confused? Caspian chuckled. Stop joking around. Since you don't want to say it, I won't push you. However, I know you're not an ordinary person. Although I can't see through you, I can sense it. Anyway, thank you for helping the Stewart family manor. Xandros smiled. Listening to his words, Caspian was surprised. He was sure that the old man indeed saw through something. Great uncle, you're too polite. It's my responsibility anyway, Caspian casually replied, not taking the matter seriously. You've indeed helped us, and for that, we are grateful. Here is an emerald pendant as a token of appreciation to thank you for helping us. Xandros took out a round emerald pendant and handed it to Caspian. The emerald was translucent, and the intricate dragon carving suggested it was of considerable value. Great uncle, I can take this, Caspian said. Take it. Maybe it'll help you in the future, Xandros insisted. Caspian was puzzled by his words, but didn't want to argue further, so he accepted the gift. All right, go back and have a rest with Willow. With that, Caspian turned to leave. Looking at his back, Xandros' expression turned serious, and a glint flashed in his eyes. I've been waiting for you for decades. I hope my choice wasn't wrong. Then, he looked up at the night sky. After a moment, a powerful energy burst out from him. This wasn't something an ordinary old man could achieve. Xandros was certainly a hidden martial arts expert. When Caspian returned to the hall, an unforeseen event occurred. Willow was missing. Chapter 248, Willow kidnapped. At first, Caspian thought Willow had simply drunk too much and gone to the restroom. After waiting for over 10 minutes, he couldn't see any sign of her, nor could he reach her phone. He began to grow anxious. He and Xandros had been standing outside the hall, and nobody had come out. Suddenly, Caspian noticed some clues. A few muddy footprints were on the ground. These footprints extended toward the wall of the hall. A sense of foreboding dawned upon him. He immediately sobered up and called Sylvia. Sylvia, Willow is missing. Send people to trace her immediately and report any findings to me at once. Yes. Sylvia didn't dare to wait for another second. She mobilized all the resources she had in South Lake City to search for Willow. Caspian followed the clues and slowly tracked it from the Stewart family manor. The footprints were fresh, which indicated the person hadn't gone far. He found similar footprints outside of the manor and managed to trace them to a stream nearby. There was a path that seemed like a shortcut into the Stewart family manor. It seemed the kidnapper had planned this, and that person was skilled in martial arts. Despite his search, Caspian lost track of the clues. Just then, Sylvia called, Caspian, I've found some clues. The person who kidnapped Willow is likely the Reaper Sylvia spoke over the phone. At her words, Caspian was filled with anger. How could it be the Reaper? Hadn't he run away from South Lake City and vanished from sight? Caspian, after Leonardo died, the Reaper joined the Mahayan Pavilion. However, now that Mahayan Pavilion has been destroyed, his revenge plan has failed. A few days ago, he secretly returned to South Lake City. He was also spotted at the Riverside Villa. Lord Caspian, this is my fault. I didn't discover the Reaper's whereabouts in time, which resulted in Willow getting kidnapped. Sylvia immediately changed her tone as she realized the severity of the situation. She was responsible for Caspian's safety, Yet she didn't notice the Reaper was spying on him. Hence, this was her mistake. However, Caspian wasn't as worried anymore upon hearing the news. He knew that the Reaper's target was definitely not Willow, it was him. As long as she wasn't in mortal danger, he was fine. Enough. No need for further words. Find out where the Reaper is now. It's not entirely your fault, Caspian said. Caspian initially thought the Reaper was powerless. Hence, he didn't care that he had escaped back then. Even after learning that the Reaper joined the Mahayan Pavilion, he hadn't been concerned as he didn't think that the Reaper could cause much trouble. But now, Caspian realized that the Reaper was cunning and that he was planning and waiting patiently to get his revenge. He even took the opportunity to kidnap Willow. Lord Caspian, this is all my fault. Please, punish me. Sylvia's voice choked with emotion. She knew how important Willow was to Caspian. It's not time for punishments. First, we must find Willow, Caspian instructed. Understood. I'll immediately search for her whereabouts, Sylvia replied. Then, he hung up the phone. He couldn't sit and wait. Just as he was preparing his next move, his phone rang again. The Reaper. Caspian answered the unknown call directly. A triumphant laugh came from the other end. Impressive. You actually know it's me. Cut to the chase. State your price and release Willow, Caspian said calmly. Easy. Come to the South Lake Pavilion before dawn. But you must come alone. If I see anyone else with you, I'll throw her into the lake. The Reaper's voice was vicious. All right, but I need to hear Willow's voice now, Caspian demanded. Hubby, I'm scared. When are you coming to save me? Willow's trembling voice came through the phone. She had been sleeping peacefully when she was taken away. She thought it was Caspian who had brought her back home. When she woke up, she realized she had been kidnapped. Willow, don't worry. I'm coming to rescue you now, Caspian said firmly. At this moment, Willow's sobbing voice came through the phone. Caspian's heart ached. His beloved wife had been taken by that jerk, the Reaper. The Reaper. I warn you, if you dare to harm Willow, I'll tear you apart. Caspian gritted his teeth. Caspian, although I'm not righteous, I won't take advantage of someone's vulnerability. My target is you. Cut the nonsense. I want to see you before sunrise. Otherwise, consequences will follow. The Reaper's tone was indifferent. With that, he hung up the phone. Caspian immediately drove back to South Lake City and informed Sylvia about the news. Sylvia and a team of men had been waiting outside the Riverside Villa for a while. Later, Caspian stopped his car outside the villa. Caspian, I've assembled the team. We can head straight to South Lake Pavilion and rescue Willow, Sylvia said urgently. As soon as she learned that the Reaper had taken Willow to South Lake Pavilion, she quickly gathered a team. Don't act recklessly. Prepare a motorboat for me. I'll go alone, Caspian ordered. Yes. Sylvia nodded. She didn't dare disobey Caspian's orders. Then, the group arrived at the lakeside at the edge of South Lake City. On a small island in the center of the lake was the South Lake Pavilion. Dozens of SUVs stopped by the lake and turned on their headlights, illuminating the center of the lake. Caspian started the motorboat and dashed toward the island. Several minutes later, he docked and approached the island. The island wasn't large, and he spotted the Reaper standing not far away. Meanwhile, Willow was sitting in a pavilion behind him. Seeing Caspian, Willow was ecstatic. With a joyful expression, she rushed toward him. The Reaper didn't stop her. His eyes were fixed solely on Caspian. His target was Caspian alone. The reason he kidnapped Willow was to seek revenge against Caspian. Chapter 249, Eternal Grandmaster. Willow, are you okay? Caspian held Willow tightly. Then, he sized her up and down. After confirming she was unharmed, he finally relaxed. Although they had been apart for more than a few hours, Caspian was extremely worried. He had never been this worried, even when he faced a million army. Hubby, I'm fine, don't worry. He didn't do anything to me. Willow blinked her watery eyes and nestled tightly against Caspian's chest. At that moment, she realized how much she had come to rely on him. Despite the previous kidnapping and the recent unexpected event, her immediate desire was to see Caspian as soon as possible. Only by his side did she feel secure. I'm relieved that you're okay. Caspian caressed Willow's cheek. Then, he turned to the Reaper with a stern expression. I didn't expect you to keep your word and not harm my wife. I have my principles and boundaries. Besides, my target is you. Your wife is indeed beautiful, but I have no interest in her, the Reaper replied with an impassive face. He was solely focused on seeking revenge against Caspian. Despite kidnapping Willow, he hadn't harmed her. This made Caspian admire him. You've achieved your goal. What's next? Caspian asked the Reaper coldly. With a swish, the Reaper drew a sharp longsword from his back. The sword's glint shimmered under the moonlight. Let's settle things between us today. His gaze was firm as he gripped the sword. This is pointless. You're not my match. Why would you choose this path to your demise? Is Leonardo truly worth it for you to sacrifice your life? Caspian questioned calmly. He couldn't understand why the Reaper still chose to fight, even if he knew he couldn't win. The Reaper fell silent for a moment before saying, I know I can't beat you, and I know this will be my end. I even thought of using cruel methods against you, like harming your wife. But I am a martial artist. I have my boundaries. I'd rather fight you than live like a coward, and I certainly won't use despicable means against you. His eyes revealed a resolute determination. Hearing this, Caspian's heart trembled. His respect for the Reaper deepened. Although the Reaper's strength might not be top tier, his behavior and discipline were unmatched by many practitioners nowadays. However, he was the enemy who abducted Willow. This was something Caspian couldn't tolerate. You can escape, go anywhere you want, and I won't chase after you. It's not worth it to die for Leonardo, Caspian stated. In truth, he didn't intend to kill him. In Caspian's eyes, the Reaper posed no real threat and wasn't worth a major confrontation. The Reaper also understood Caspian's reasoning. He could certainly choose to flee. However, Leonardo had been kind to him. Now that Leonardo had been killed by Caspian, he sought revenge for him. He had joined Mahayan Pavilion to seek vengeance. On the surface, it seemed like the Reaper had been trying his best all along to avenge Leonardo. But only he knew why he was doing this. You don't understand. Back then, I was reckless and offended many. I was nearly killed. It was Sir Leon who helped me out of trouble and saved my life. Sir Leon was kind to me, so I owe him. I have to repay this debt of vengeance to him. Even if I know I can't achieve it, I'll try my best. Otherwise, even if I live, I'll be guilty for life. Determination was written on the Reaper's face. Upon hearing this, Caspian was moved. The Reaper was a man of honor, driven by chivalry. For his benefactor, he was willing to face death. If you're seeking death wholeheartedly, then I'll grant it. Caspian didn't waste any more time. He understood that the Reaper was determined to die. Let's begin, Caspian said firmly. Caspian, I hope you won't hold back. The Reaper burst out, his aura becoming increasingly powerful. At this moment, he was like a raging storm, prepared to fight with all his might, the highest level of the 3rd tier. During this period, the Reaper hadn't stopped exploring his strength. He trained tirelessly day and night, but was still stuck at the highest level of the 3rd tier. He was one step away from becoming an eternal Grandmaster. Although it might sound simple, he understood well the vast difference between the highest level of the Tier 3 expert and an eternal Grandmaster. Many people spent their entire lives trying to become eternal Grandmasters but ended up in despair. Sensing the Reaper's sudden surge in strength, Caspian shook his head and felt a sense of regret. The Reaper was a martial arts prodigy, but his thinking was somewhat rigid. He insisted on ruining himself for the sake of Leonardo. However, his current strength was nothing against Caspian. The Reaper bellowed angrily. He wielded his longsword, and a burst of killing intent permeated the air. His movements were as fast as lightning. Even Caspian was shocked to witness this. The Reaper's strength had undergone an unprecedented breakthrough as he was much stronger than before. The violent sword energy spread around, creating ripples in the water. At this moment, the Reaper held nothing back. Caspian remained composed when he saw the Reaper charging toward him. An average person might think the Reaper was immensely powerful, but in Caspian's eyes, he was as insignificant as an ant. The Reaper knew he only had one chance to strike against Caspian. He had to make it a deadly blow. Caspian furrowed his brows and tightened his fists. He was prepared to take this battle seriously. This was the respect he gave him. Let me see how much you've improved. Caspian roared and rushed forward with an explosive punch. The Reaper's expression stiffened as he gripped his longsword tightly. He had to make the strike count. Even Willow could feel the oppressive air emanating from the Reaper. In contrast, Caspian didn't seem to pose much threat as he was fighting barehanded. Willow couldn't perceive any formidable power from Caspian's fist. However, the Reaper didn't think the same. As Caspian first approached, an immensely powerful wind blew and slammed toward him. Caspian's punch seemed unremarkable, yet it was immensely potent. Though Caspian's move seemed ordinary, the power it held was not to be underestimated. The Reaper seemed to sense that Caspian's strength was far above his, an eternal Grandmaster, an innate Grandmaster, or a Supreme Grandmaster. The Reaper dared not imagine as Caspian's strength was unfathomable. The oppressive force from Caspian's fist left him breathless. In the next moment, his eyes were bloodshot, and blood appeared at the corner of his mouth. In that critical moment, the Reaper felt his strength suddenly surge. His blood seemed to burn like fire. A breakthrough. In the direst moment, he had ascended to become an eternal Grandmaster. Under the cover of night, the two engaged in battle. A thunderous roar reverberated across the surface of the lake. Chapter 250 Hubby, I want to. Their figures clashed. The Reaper froze in place. While Caspian remained indifferent, his victory was assured. A few seconds later, the Reaper's eyes widened. Blood spurted from his mouth. In the instant they exchanged blows, he had successfully broken through to become an eternal Grandmaster. The Reaper felt that he had a chance of winning, yet the strength he possessed was still no match for Caspian. In just one move, he was defeated. He was utterly shocked. Caspian's unparalleled strength was unfathomable. The immense power he held surpassed his imagination. What kind of person are you? The Reaper's face was contorted in a mix of fear and anger as he asked. He wanted to know the truth before dying. I am the Diaturanian god of war, Caspian said. At this moment, Willow was completely stunned by what was unfolding before her. She didn't even hear the conversation between Caspian and the Reaper, as she was entirely absorbed in the shock of it all. Diaturanian god of war, the unbeatable warrior, the Diaturanian god of war. Finally, the Reaper understood why Caspian's strength was so formidable. Leave. Don't come back to South Lake City again, Caspian said calmly. You're letting me go. The Reaper looked at Caspian in astonishment. I have no reason to kill you, Caspian answered. His expression is as calm as water. At those words, the Reaper let out a bitter smile. Even as an eternal Grandmaster, he couldn't withstand a single blow from Caspian. Even if you don't kill me, I can't continue living. There's no way for me to avenge Sir Leon. I have no reason to live. The Reaper's expression darkened as he lifted the sword in his hand to his neck. Suddenly, blood gushed from his neck. He could have left, but he chose the most tragic way. Soon, he fell to the ground. Ah, what a waste. Why did he have to take it to this extreme? Caspian shook his head and sighed as he looked at the Reaper's body. The Reaper was indeed a martial arts prodigy, and it was a pity to see him die like this. Willow covered her eyes as she couldn't bear watching it anymore. Though she had seen many gruesome scenes before, she still felt horrified witnessing this one. Caspian. At that moment, a large group of people appeared on the lake, and several yachts rushed forward. Sylvia was worried, so she rushed over. Caspian, are you okay? Sylvia asked with concern as she arrived at South Lake Pavilion. Caspian didn't say much as he thought that her concern was unnecessary. When Sylvia saw the Reaper's body, a look of astonishment crossed his face. He's already dead. She could tell that he didn't die at Caspian's hands. His posture suggested he committed suicide. As for the reasons, Sylvia didn't press further. Find him a good burial place. After saying that, Caspian turned and held Willow's hand. They left the pavilion by riding a motorboat. At this moment, Caspian's heart was still somewhat stirred. Even though the Reaper was his enemy, he had a righteous heart. Therefore, Caspian greatly admired his character. Get a few people here and take his body away for a proper burial, Sylvia ordered. Then, several Special Forces members took away the Reaper's body. As Caspian left, the sky gradually darkened, and a light drizzle fell. Upon returning to Riverside Villa, Sylvia increased the number of guards in the villa. Caspian, after this incident, I realized I was careless. I've strengthened the security team in South Lake City. The same incident won't happen again, Sylvia reported to Caspian as soon as she finished her tasks. Good. If a similar problem arises again, I won't spare you. Caspian nodded. Sylvia's actions eased Caspian's worries. If he were to return to the battlefield someday, he wouldn't have to worry about any mishaps happening to Willow. Yes, Caspian, Sylvia replied solemnly. At this moment, Macy entered. Caspian, we received an invitation from Galacrest. We're not sure their intentions. Macy handed an invitation to Caspian as soon as she entered. Galacrest. Caspian furrowed his brows as he took the invitation. Galacrest is a well-known gang in Naporia. Their leader, Cole Wilson, has immeasurable strength. She explained. Do we have any connection with Galacrest? I've never disclosed my identity to the outside world. What's the meaning behind this invitation? He glanced at the invitation and tossed it onto the table. In 5 days, Galacrest will hold a martial arts competition in Naporia. They probably want you to participate. Additionally, I received news that Wiley has joined Galacrest with his son. Macy reported everything she knew. I see. It makes a lot of sense now. Caspian smiled. Wiley still hadn't given up on his wicked means. Caspian, shall we go to the martial arts competition? Sylvia asked. Since they've sent an invitation, why not join in the fun? I let Wiley go in hopes of finding more scumbags, and it seems to have paid off. Caspian grinned. Hearing this, Sylvia and Macy remained silent. Soon after, the two left Riverside Villa. Willow had rested in the villa the entire day and hadn't gone to the company. As she came downstairs, she saw Caspian sitting on the sofa and leaped straight into his arms. Hubby, what did you, Sylvia, and the others talk about? Willow asked, cuddled up in Caspian's embrace. Nothing much, just casual conversation. Is everything all right at South Lake Corporation? He asked. Everything's fine. Even if I'm not there, Miranda will manage the company affairs. Now that South Lake Corporation dominates the market, our business is thriving, she said proudly. She knew that she owed Caspian a lot for her success. From the brink of dissolution, South Lake Corporation had gradually made a comeback and now emerged as the largest corporation in the Two Lakes area. He would hold absolute influence in the Two Lakes area. Since things are fine at South Lake Corporation, how about we go to Naporia? It's a good chance to investigate your background. Caspian suggested. Naporia. Sure. I've never been there. Plus, the company is stable now, so I don't need to worry much. Willow nodded in agreement. Naporia was an ancient city of Diatoran situated by the sea. It was a popular destination for tourists. Great. Get ready, and we'll go in a few days. He smiled and ran his fingers through her hair. Suddenly, Willow lifted her head from Caspian's arms. In the next moment, he felt a sweet sensation on his lips. Hubby, I want to... Before Willow could finish her sentence, Caspian lifted her up and headed back to the bedroom.